To introduce the team, I am the team leader as well as the head designer. We have Sonny, who is serving as the main 3D artist and modeler. We have Lily, who is serving as the main concept artist. And we have Ewan, who is our head programmer. To overview the story and premise of the game, the main character is descending through a buried and broken down pyramid, searching for long lost artifacts of the Egyptian gods that were stolen from their family long ago. As they descend, the player will have to fight monsters, avoid traps, and use the different artifacts they find in order to go deeper, eventually facing the final guardian of the pyramid that's stuck in the lowest layer, hiding the deepest treasures. This is a top-down roguelike dungeon crawler, similar to something like Binding of Isaac. And as for the client's needs, this game will feature many different Egyptian artifacts and would be found in an exhibit showing all these sorts of artifacts, and it would attract an audience that doesn't usually go to these sorts of exhibits by showing these artifacts in use rather than them simply sitting there in a glass pane.
Right. So we took inspiration mainly from games like Enter the Dungeon and Hades, where there's waves of monsters that will come and attack you. And we also took inspiration from Binding of Isaac for the layout of the actual missions. For the start of the game, we didn't really have a complete inspiration because we took it from many different places, but main places would be Paper Mario and Ultracal to get the design that we look for, which just needs to be low poly and quite small.
For the colour palette, we decided to go with a lot of yellows and blues because they're just like colours that are quite commonly used, like in Egypt, and the analogous colours, so it'll allow the blue colours to stand out a lot more and contrast with everything that's there. And it just fits well in the game setting. I also decided to go with a low poly art style because it's simple but very eye-catching, and it means it's not super hard to create. And it also means that if we do decide to say like change styles, it wouldn't be super hard to create. I'd seem to have to create a low poly version anyway. So making it simple means easy to change in the future as well.
For the base mechanics of the player, we have a short-range dash that will send the player forward. This is used primarily in order for dodging attacks, but also for movement throughout certain rooms. We have a quick light attack combo that's used for dealing with lesser enemies or to deal damage when your time frame to do so is quite limited. There's also heavy attacks, which require a startup but are capable of dealing more damage and are capable of breaking and hitting enemies who are armored. We also have ranged weapons to allow players to still deal damage from afar, to deal with different types of enemies. And throughout the game, there's going to be different equipment. The players can be equipped with different melee weapons, ranged weapons, as well as different smaller trinkets and artifacts, which provide different effects and buffs to allow for different play styles and builds to increase replayability.
This is the control scheme we decided to go for, with all the buttons taking into consideration, like how you would be holding the control and how you'd actually play the game, and making sure you'd be comfortable to play.
Some additional mechanics include the organ system. By completing certain challenges, the player will be able to find different organs that will be found in a mummification, and by giving these organs, the player is able to find rare and powerful items. There is also the icons, which serve as a shop system in the game, whereby making an offering, the player can get items they normally wouldn't be able to. And finally, there is secret rooms, which are parts of a layer which are not immediately accessible, but either by looking closely or by solving a puzzle, the player can access them, granting them a quicker time through the floor, as well as secret rewards. We have some examples of these sorts of systems being used before, such as the Secret Room in the Binding of Isaac, the Shrine of Blood in Risk of Rain 2, and the Secret Room found in Ultrakill.
This is just a robot about what we want the inside of the pyramid to look like. And then we made one of like just how the outfits and like the facial features the different people in Egypt have. And then I created a design looking at the outfits that were already on there. I created 3 different options that the player could wear, and then I created a visual concept sketch of what the character would look like.
We then created some concepts for some of the basic enemies that would be in the game, such as a scorpion, which is a standard fast, low-range enemy that simply chases down the player. They have very low health but tend to appear in large numbers, so these are one of the enemies you would see very commonly, sort of just appearing in hordes. Then have the mummy, which is the more high health standard enemy. They have a more damaging attack that requires a bit of a wind up, and they will slowly approach the player, which means they have to be dealt with a bit differently to the scorpions. And finally, we have the snakes. These are low health enemies like the scorpion, but unlike the scorpion, they will run out at the player when they get close, requiring you to try and play around them and dodge them and then strike them once they've attacked, instead of simply mindlessly hitting them. Here we have an example of a floor layout. It's been keyed to see exactly what would be found here. You have your standard rooms, enemy rooms for enemy encounters, rooms more focused on avoiding traps on the platform, as well as indicators for where items will be placed, and an example of how a hidden room could work. Or in this one, there are 2 switches hidden in different rooms, and by flipping both switches, you unlock the doors to the secret room, providing you with gold, an extra item, as well as giving you direct access to the exit.
This is an asset list that I made. It's in 4 different sections for the animation, modelling, art, coding, different aspects. I labelled them in high, medium, and low priority, so to know which things actually need to be done and what is able to be thrown away if we don't have time.
Here we have a project plan in the form of a Gantt chart. This features the content that we will need to create, as well as the general time frame we would like it to be created with. Using this color-coded key for tracking who would most likely be doing what task and what general time frame we would like them to be done in. Of course, this is all subject to change, and some of these tasks are built with lenient timeframes in mind. Some of these will take less time than predicted, which can be used for filling out any task which may need more attention. For project management, we're making use of agile techniques, holding regular meetings to discuss progress, putting a heavy focus on feedback we receive from outside sources, as well as changing any plans in order to adapt whenever anything doesn't exactly go as planned. We'll also be making use of Scrum techniques, focusing on taking small parts of the game and heavily working on them in short sprints, as well as keeping an up-to-date database to keep track of what content is created and what still needs to be done, as well as meeting up daily in order to discuss and keep track of progress.
These are the software that we'll be using for the project. So we'll use software like 3ds Max and Substance Painter in order to create the models and texture them. Additionally, we'll use Unreal Engine to create the game, as well as Photoshop and Procreate to actually draw any concept art that we have.
We were going to aim for a 12 to 16 audience, so 16 to 18 as a secondary. As we think the game should obviously try and attract a younger audience to the museum, because that's an audience that wouldn't go to a museum. And we wanted it to be around a 12 so that it could fit all the things we wanted into the game, like the organ system, which obviously would allow the 7+. So 12 would be a good fit. It's comparable to games like Binding of Isaac, Hades, and Gungeon, because there's very similar mechanics. We want it to be on Steam, but also PlayStation, Xbox, because they're more accessible to a younger audience. But Steam is more for an older audience. I mean, the game would be around 2 or 3 hours, but obviously that would be if you didn't win the game in the first try, which shouldn't be impossible. But if you did a successful one, would be 30 minutes ish. It would be in English, and Yeah, right, we're 12.
Excellent. Well done. Just under 10 minutes, so I'll give you that one. Just go back a slide for me. Just to start us off again, I think so. That's fine. So I think again, it's a very well-rounded idea. You can clearly see you've met your client brief and took it into consideration how it's going to meet that, how it's going to be effective in a museum setting, so on and so forth. One I'll start with is you say your successful run length is 30 minutes, and that's if you complete everything. Am I correct?
I think it's like the game, because obviously, like when you do one run, you probably die the first time.
Yeah.
This game is generally, it has a focus on replayability and difficulty. You're not expected to be able to beat the game in your first few tries. It's something that you're supposed to repeat with the knowledge you have in order to do better on it.
Yeah, it's just my question was going to be about the replayability factors. If you can complete it once you've started to understand the mechanics of the game, where does then replayability factors come in?
Essentially, the replayability will come through the different randomized items, because you're not going to get the same items every time. What you will be able to do in the game will not always be the same. You'll have to play differently. So by going through different items, you'll get a slightly different experience.
Cool. So it changes gameplay quite nicely then. Excellent. It was nice to see your asset lists, your priorities, your schedule. You've included some affordance there for stuff you can't control, as you've mentioned, so that's great to consider. And it's nice to see you have done that. It would have been nice to see a playboard of some form. You know, when you were talking about your enemies and the different types of attacks, it might have been nice to include a playboard to show off potentially how them attacks might work. So take that into consideration going forward. The level layout was nice and clear. Sorry, your floor plan was nice and clear with the keys and stuff that you give. It would have been nice to see a golden path, essentially, just because when you put a lot of squares together to make rooms, yes, there was doors, but sometimes it's not really clear which ways you can go, so on and so forth. But again, as a first iteration, it's always good to see that you've considered them things from the outset, really. Yeah, well done, guys.
In terms of, I know I just jumped at the end there, on this slide in particular, what makes it a Peggy Rated 12 game?
Generally, probably that some parts of the game obviously are a bit more violent than you would see in something like a 7. There's nothing too far. Like generally, depictions of things like blood or gore will be kept to a minimum. But again, things like depictions of an organ, even if it is simply one that's been preserved, possibly couldn't be allowed in something like a 7. As well as just allowing for things that may be a bit more violent or grotesque.
So what I would suggest is literally doing your little bits of research here, there and everywhere. Literally go on the website and find out what the actual stampings are for what clarifies as a Peggy Rated 16 or an 18 or a 12 or a 7. And find out what actually constitutes as being rated that thing. Because if one aspect of your game crosses over into one of the other age brackets, even if it's just one of them, like blood or gore, excessive violence, language, nudity, so on and so forth, there's all these different little ticky boxes. If at least one of those gets ticked, your game has to fall under that age rating, which obviously changes with the demographics. Okay, so make sure that if there's a question like that pops up again in future, you can clearly and quickly, efficiently answer why your game is a 12. Because there's no gore, there's no blood, there's no violence, or no excessive violence, etc., etc.
Yeah, right.
Cool.